after they had fallen behind by 6 in the quarter. Then Sydney Colson, as Aliyah Boston has an extended conversation with the officials, and then is gonna get over to Angel Gray. Angel?
Aliyah Boston had her arm clamped under the rim, fought for position, and somehow she got whistled for the foul. Even after review, the call stood, leaving ESPN's Rebecca Lobo stunned on air, saying she expected it to be overturned. For Indiana Fever fans, this wasn't an isolated mistake. It's the latest in a season of questionable officiating, from Sophie Cunningham openly accusing the league of double standards to constant no calls on their stars. And this time, the moment couldn't have been bigger.
You could overturn it to an offensive foul. You could also maintain that it's a foul but take away the continuation. All of those things could happen here on this call.
The interesting thing is, when you get to this point of the play, it is a foul on Boston. But it's because her arm was clamped earlier in the play.
I mean, look at that.
Like, what can she do there?
She literally can do nothing. I don't know how that's not overturned to an offensive foul.
I agree with you.
That looks about as clear as it gets. And you saw how quickly Stephanie White challenged that.
It was the moment that set the tone for everything that followed, and it came at the expense of Aliyah Boston. Midway through a tense fourth quarter against the Dallas Wings, Boston fought for position in the paint, only for her arm to be clearly clamped by a Dallas defender. Most in the arena expected an offensive foul on Dallas, but instead, the whistle went against Boston. The replay left little room for debate. Boston's movement was restricted, her arm pinned, yet the officials upheld the call after review. The Fever lost not just possession, but their final challenge and a critical timeout. On the broadcast, Rebecca Lobo's stunned reaction mirrored what Fever fans had been saying for weeks. How was that not overturned? This wasn't just a bad call, it was the latest in a season-long pattern that players, coaches, and fans have been growing increasingly vocal about.
After review, we have no illegal conduct by Euro, so the call will stand as confirmed. This will be also, Indiana will lose their challenge as well as their timeout. One shot for Euro. Thank you.
That's stunning to me. I mean, Aliyah Boston, look at her. Lee puts her one hand down and then hands Boston down with her other arm.
I gotta say, Rebecca, I'm sure we'll get an explanation from Sue Blau at some point soon.
The Fever's problems didn't stop at the officiating table. Just days earlier, they'd been hit with a devastating roster blow. In a single night against the Phoenix Mercury, backup point guard Sydney Colson tore her left ACL, while fellow floor general Arie McDonald fractured a bone in her right foot. Both injuries were instantly ruled season-ending. And with Caitlin Clark already sidelined since July with a groin injury, Indiana suddenly found itself without its top 3 point guards. That left them with no natural ball handler, no one to initiate half-court sets under pressure, and no consistent way to break an opponent's full-court press. This wasn't just about X's and O's, it was about survival. A team built to run its offense through skilled facilitators was now scrambling to find anyone capable of absorbing those minutes. The absence of a true point guard meant every possession was harder to execute, every pass riskier, and every defensive trap more dangerous. Turnovers were bound to rise, and without Clark's perimeter gravity or McDonald's quickness, spacing on the floor became an issue overnight. The Fever weren't just playing shorthanded, they were playing a completely different style than the one that had kept them in the playoff hunt. And in a league as competitive as the WNBA, that kind of disruption can change the trajectory of an entire season. The immediate response to the backcourt crisis came in the form of an emergency phone call. With the Dallas game looming, the Fever front office turned to 11-year veteran Odyssey Sims, signing her to a hardship contract just 24 hours before tip-off. Sims had a decorated resume known as a tough, score-first guard who'd carved out a reputation for delivering in big moments, but this situation was unique. She arrived with barely enough time to skim the playbook, let alone build chemistry with her new teammates. When she checked in against Dallas, it was clear she was still finding her place. She played 13 minutes, registered 2 assists, 1 turnover, and no points, spending most of her floor time reading her teammates' movements rather than running instinctive sets. That lack of familiarity was inevitable, but it underscored how precarious the Fever's situation had become. They weren't just integrating a new player, they were rebuilding their offensive identity on the fly. In the absence of Colson, McDonald, and Clark, head coach Stephanie White had one realistic option for initiating the offense: shift Kelsey Mitchell out of her natural role as a pure scorer and into the lead guard position. It was a move born out of necessity, not preference. Mitchell, one of the league's most efficient offensive weapons, was suddenly tasked with both breaking the Dallas press and shouldering the scoring load. The Wings, sensing the imbalance, sent extra defenders her way on nearly every possession. They trapped her early, forced the ball out of her hands, and made her work for every inch of space. Still, Mitchell delivered 24 points on 7 of 15 shooting, including 4 triples, while grabbing 6 rebounds. But the effort came at a cost. Each basket was followed by another exhausting trip up the court against double teams. In that role, she wasn't just the Fever's go-to shooter, she was their primary engine. Around her, the supporting cast understood they would have to punch above their weight to keep the game alive. Sophie Cunningham poured in 14 points on 5 of 10 shooting, bringing her trademark edge diving for loose balls, drawing contact, and jawing with defenders to set the tone. Chloe Bibby was flawless from deep, going 3 for 3 from beyond the arc and adding 11 points in just 12 minutes, including a momentum-swinging 3 that cut into a Dallas run late in the game. In the paint, Natasha Howard anchored the defense with a 12-point, 12-rebound, double-double, and 3 blocks, forcing Dallas to work harder for shots inside. And despite constant physical play, Aliyah Boston fought her way to 14 points, giving Indiana a much-needed inside option when perimeter looks were contested. This was survival basketball, a patchwork lineup battling a playoff race and a hot-shooting Dallas team. The Fever weren't winning on talent depth, they were staying alive on grit, hustle, and the sheer will to compete. But that was only the beginning of how chaotic this night would become. For 3 quarters, it looked like Dallas might simply grind Indiana down. The Fever were without their natural point guards, relying on an improvised offense and struggling to match the Wings' physicality. But then came the 4th quarter, a stretch that flipped the script and had Gainbridge Fieldhouse buzzing. Indiana outscored Dallas 25-4 those final 10 minutes, turning what had been a double-digit deficit into a legitimate shot at stealing the game. Every possession was a war of attrition, and somehow, the Fever kept winning them. The rally wasn't driven by one player going nuclear, it was a team performance. Sophie Cunningham kept her foot on the gas, knocking down a pair of timely threes and injecting her trademark energy into every defensive stand. Chloe Bibby, who'd been perfect from deep all night, buried another crucial triple to cut the Dallas lead, just as the momentum seemed to swing back to the visitors. Natasha Howard cleaned the glass relentlessly, snagging rebounds in traffic and swatting away would-be layups. And Aliyah Boston, absorbing contact on nearly every trip down the floor, found ways to score in the paint when the perimeter shots weren't falling. It was textbook by-committee basketball, each player doing exactly what the moment demanded. Defensively, Indiana tightened the screws, rotations were crisp, closeouts were aggressive, and the Wings found themselves taking rushed, low-percentage shots late in the shot clock. That defensive lockdown allowed the Fever to push in transition, catching Dallas off balance and creating scoring chances before the defense could set. The building erupted as the deficit shrank, and with just over 10 seconds left, the Fever had the ball and trailed by a single point. Then came the decision that would dominate the post-game conversation. With 11.7 seconds left after securing a defensive rebound, Indiana opted not to use their final timeout. The choice signaled an intent to attack quickly, hoping to catch Dallas without their preferred defensive matchups. But without the structure of a drawn-up play, the possession turned chaotic. Kelsey Mitchell, already burdened with both playmaking and scoring all night, found herself dribbling into a tightly contested mid-range jumper. It missed, and Dallas secured the rebound. Stephanie White immediately called timeout, but with just 1.7 seconds left, there was no realistic chance to execute anything meaningful. The Fever's final inbound play didn't produce a clean look, and the game ended 81-80 Dallas's favor. Post-game, White didn't deflect. She admitted she should have used the timeout earlier, at the 3-second mark, to give her team a better shot. In a season defined by adaptability and grit, this was a rare but costly lapse in clock management, the kind of split-second decision that can tilt a playoff race. The comeback had showcased Indiana's resilience and fight, but the final moments were a reminder of how thin the margin for error is when you're playing shorthanded in the WNBA. Indiana's 4th quarter against the Dallas Wings wasn't just impressive, it was the kind of run that can define a season. Down by double digits heading into the final frame, the Fever flipped the game on its head with a suffocating 25-4 surge that had Gainbridge Fieldhouse roaring. It started on the defensive end. Head coach Stephanie White tightened her rotation, pushing her players to close out hard on Dallas shooters, cut off driving lanes, and force contested jumpers deep into the shot clock. The Wings, who had found success earlier in the night with ball movement and inside scoring, suddenly looked rattled. Turnovers piled up, and Indiana's defensive rebounding, led by Natasha Howard and Aliyah Boston, eliminated second-chance opportunities entirely. Offensively, the Fever stopped trying to force their sets through the teeth of Dallas's defense and began attacking in transition before the Wings could get organized. Sophie Cunningham drilled 2 momentum-swinging threes, while Chloe Bibby, perfect from deep all night, buried another from the corner that brought the crowd to its feet. Even as Kelsey Mitchell continued to draw double teams, she found ways to contribute, slipping passes to cutters, kicking out to open shooters, and picking her spots to attack when the defense sagged. Every basket chipped away at the deficit, and with each defensive stop, the noise in the building grew louder. But as electric as the comeback was, there were cracks under the surface. The Fever's thin rotation, already stretched by the loss of their top 3 point guards, began to show signs of fatigue in the final 90 seconds. 2 critical possessions ended without points, one on a rushed mid-range jumper early in the shot clock, the other on a misread in transition that led to a turnover. In both cases, the opportunity was there to take the lead, and in a game this tight, those missed chances proved costly. Still, Indiana had the ball with a chance to win in the final moments. The confidence in the huddle was palpable. They'd weathered the storm, clawed back into the fight, and now had Dallas on their heels. But closing out a comeback in the WNBA often comes down to execution in the last minute, and that's where the Fever faltered. Whether it was the mental toll of battling uphill for 3 quarters, or simply the strain of asking the same core group to carry such a heavy load, the precision that defined the rally slipped away when it mattered most. The fourth quarter proved the Fever can go toe-to-toe with anyone, even when severely undermanned. It also served as a reminder that in this league, seizing control late isn't enough. You have to finish the job. For Indiana, the inability to convert those last few possessions turned what could have been a season-defining win into yet another what if in a year already full of them. When you step back from the chaos of the Fever's loss to Dallas, the controversial whistle on Aliyah Boston isn't just an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that has followed Indiana all season. This team hasn't just been battling opponents. They've been fighting through a string of questionable calls, no calls, and lopsided interpretations of the rules, and the Boston sequence, where a clear clamp by a defender somehow resulted in a foul against her, has now become the latest flashpoint in a growing storm. This isn't coming out of nowhere. Fever players and coaches have been planting seeds of frustration for months, pointing to officiating that they feel punishes their physical style while letting opponents get away with the same, if not more. It's a double standard they believe strips away their competitive edge. Boston herself has been on the receiving end repeatedly, absorbing punishing contact in the post with little protection. That's why head coach Stephanie White's post-game comments resonated so strongly. Calling Boston the worst officiated post player in the league wasn't hyperbole in her mind. It was a factual observation built from weeks of evidence. And this is where Sophie Cunningham's earlier public remarks come roaring back into relevance. In her very first podcast episode, she accused WNBA referees of letting certain stars like Caitlin Clark, chief among them, take excessive physical punishment without consequence. She didn't stop there, hinting at systemic issues in officiating and even suggesting that locker rooms around the league had talked openly about showing Clark what the W really is. At the time, those comments were controversial enough to dominate headlines for days, but in light of games like this Dallas matchup, they start to sound less like gossip and more like a warning. The broader implication is that this isn't just about one bad night. The perception, fair or not, is that there's a consistency problem in WNBA officiating, and it disproportionately affects teams that rely on physical play inside. For a league trying to expand its audience and credibility, repeated high-profile games ending with fans and analysts questioning the referees is a dangerous trend. If nothing changes, the Fever risk more than just a playoff seed. They risk having their entire postseason run, and by extension, their most marketable players defined by how games are officiated rather than how they're played. And that, more than any single loss, could have long-term consequences for both the franchise and the WNBA's public image. As the final buzzer echoed through Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the scoreboard told one story, Dallas 81, Indiana 80, but the body language on the Fever bench told another. Aliyah Boston's frustration was written across her face. She'd just endured a night where, in her view and the view of her coach, she was on the wrong side of one of the season's most baffling officiating calls. That single moment, an arm clamp turned into a foul against her, became the flashpoint in a game already loaded with emotion, playoff implications, and lingering injury setbacks. For fans, it's not just about the L in the standings. It's about the feeling that the league's brightest young stars are playing on uneven ground. Stephanie White didn't mince words post-game, calling Boston the worst officiated player in the league. Those are more than heat-of-the-moment remarks. They're an open challenge to the WNBA's officiating crews, the kind of statement that will stick in headlines and, potentially, in the minds of referees for future games. The Fever's issues go deeper than one whistle. This season has been a grind against adversity, losing 3 primary ball handlers, leaning on emergency signings like Odyssey Sims, and forcing Kelsey Mitchell into a role that demands both elite scoring and constant playmaking. Through all of it, Indiana has kept themselves in playoff position. But as we saw against Dallas, that margin is razor thin. One botched possession or questionable call can swing a game, and in a playoff race this tight, a single game can define the season. Boston's reaction, controlled but visibly boiling, summed up the mood in Indianapolis. This wasn't just about her own stat line or personal treatment. It was about a team that roared back from double digits down in the fourth, outscoring Dallas 25-4, only to have their work undercut in the game's decisive moments. And when even a national voice like Rebecca Lobo questions why a call stood after review, it adds legitimacy to the frustration boiling inside the Fever locker room. The road ahead doesn't get easier. Indiana sits at 18-15, clinging to 6th place with only a handful of games left. Caitlin Clark's return looms, but even her presence won't erase the questions about officiating consistency, questions Sophie Cunningham raised weeks ago and that now echo louder after nights like this. The Fever know they can't control the whistle, but they can control how they respond. Whether that means turning this anger into fuel or letting it derail their focus will decide how this story ends. For now, Aliyah Boston's message is clear. The Fever want the game called the same for everyone, every night. And until that happens, every trip into the paint, every post-up, and every playoff game will carry the shadow of nights like this one.